My child, I need you to hear this clearly with your full attention, undistracted by everything else competing for it right now. Something has been unfolding in the spiritual realm that I want to explain to you in full because you have carried the weight of it for long enough without understanding what was actually happening underneath the surface of your circumstances. The people who took advantage of your generosity, the ones who benefited from what you built while you watched from the outside of your own success. The systems that delayed what you knew in your spirit was coming. All of it has been moving toward a moment, and that moment is now. I want you to understand what was actually taken from you because it was not random, and it was not simply bad luck arriving in a difficult season. It was targeted. They did not only take your ideas, your effort, the resources you had built up over years of careful, faithful work. They took something less visible and more costly. They took your momentum. They took the ease with which you used to trust people before you learned, through painful experience, exactly how calculating some people are capable of being. For a season, it looked like they walked away from what they took without consequence. No accountability, no reckoning, just silence on the other side of what they did to you. I want you to understand what that silence actually was. Silence is not the same thing as absence. Silence, in the spiritual realm, is very often the sound of something being processed that has not yet become visible. And what was being processed in the silence that followed what was taken from you was not nothing. It was everything. You stayed quiet through most of it. You did not retaliate in the ways that would have felt justified in the moment. You trusted that the truth would eventually surface, and that balance would eventually be restored, even when you had no evidence in front of you to support that trust, except the trust itself. I watched every choice you made to remain in integrity when the door to a different response was standing open in front of you. I want you to know that I was not simply observing your restraint with detached approval. I was building a case with it. Every moment you chose to stay quiet instead of expose, you were protecting something in the spiritual realm that exposure would have compromised. Every night you cried instead of cursed. You were positioning yourself under a covering that the people who wronged you cannot access, because that covering only extends over the one who responds to injustice the way you responded. They may have walked away from the situation looking untouched, but what they actually walked away from was protection. You stayed inside it. They left it behind. Type "I stayed silent" in the comments. My child, I want to also speak to the specific quality of what you lost, because there is a category of loss that does not show up on any visible inventory, and yet costs more than everything that does. You lost a particular ease you used to carry into new relationships and new opportunities. The kind of openness that assumes good faith until something proves otherwise. After what was done to you, that openness changed. It became more guarded, more watchful, slower to extend trust. I want you to know that I noticed that change in you, and I did not interpret it as a flaw that needed correcting. I understood it as the cost of an injury that had not yet been addressed. You also lost a measure of confidence, not in your capability, but in your judgment of people. You began to question decisions you had made with a clear conscience, wondering retroactively whether you had missed signs that, in hindsight, seemed obvious. That kind of doubt did not come from failure on your part. It came from integrity trying to make sense of an injustice that violated the basic assumptions integrity requires in order to function without constant suspicion. I want to release you from that particular doubt right now. You did not miss anything that a reasonably trusting person would have caught. You were deceived by people who specialized in deception, and being deceived by a specialist is not evidence of your own poor discernment. It is evidence of their skill at the very thing they should never have been using that skill for. My child, I want to tell you what has actually been happening in the time since what was taken from you, because what you experienced was not divine indifference. It was something closer to due process. In any legitimate legal proceeding, there is investigation before judgment is rendered. There is documentation before a sentence is determined. The more serious the offense, the more thorough the process has to be before the conclusion is reached. What you have been living through during the season of apparent silence was the thoroughness of a process that takes the offense against you seriously enough to do it correctly. As it is written in Psalm 35:1, "Contend, Lord, with those who contend with me, Fight against those who fight against me, my child. That is not a request I leave unanswered. When you bring a contention before me, I do not respond casually. I take up the case, and taking up a case properly requires time that looks, from where you are standing, like delay. But what was happening during that time was not neglect. Evidence was being gathered, patterns were being documented. The full motive behind what was done to you, not just the visible act but the intention underneath it, was being fully exposed not to you in that season, but to the only authority whose verdict actually determines the outcome. And now, my child, the season of gathering is complete. The time of waiting for the case to be built has reached its conclusion. I want you to consider something about how legitimate processes of justice actually work, because I think it will help you understand what the delay was actually doing. The more serious the offense, the longer and more careful the investigation has to be. A minor matter can be resolved quickly, because little is at stake in getting it wrong. But when what was done to you was significant, when the betrayal cut deep and the theft was real and the damage to your trust and your momentum and your peace was substantial, the process that addresses it correctly cannot be rushed without becoming careless. What you have been living through was not divine indifference dressed up as patience. It was divine due process, conducted with the seriousness that the offense against you actually deserved. My child, I also want to address the specific question that has likely surfaced in you more than once during this season. Why did the process have to take this long? Why could the verdict not have arrived sooner, sparing you the additional months or years of watching the people who wronged you continue forward as though nothing had happened? I want to answer that honestly, rather than with a generic reassurance that does not actually address the weight of the question. The process took as long as it did because the case being built was not only about what they did to you, it was about establishing a pattern thorough enough that the consequence, when it arrived, would be unmistakable in its source and undeniable in its connection to what they had done. A premature judgment rendered before the pattern was fully established can be dismissed as coincidence by the very people it is meant to correct. A judgment that arrives after the pattern has had time to fully reveal itself cannot be dismissed that easily. There is also a second reason for the length of the process, one that concerns you directly rather than them. You needed the time, not because I was unconcerned with your suffering during the waiting, but because what is being restored to you now requires a version of you that the earlier season had not yet finished producing. If the reversal had come too early, you would have stepped into it still carrying wounds that would have sabotaged what you were being given. The delay protected the gift as much as it built the case. Type I am still covered in the comments. Sow a seed right now for the one who stayed in integrity through a season that tested every part of their willingness to remain faithful, who chose restraint when retaliation was available and justified, who trusted a process they could not see the workings of. Visit the link in the description below or scan the QR code on your screen. Sow it as a declaration that the case has been built, the evidence has been gathered, the patterns have been documented in full, and the verdict is no longer pending. My child, I want to speak now about what is happening to the people who took from you, because what is unfolding in their lives right now is not an attack. I want to be precise about this distinction because it matters. They are not being attacked. They are being exposed by the weight of their own choices. What they built on deception looked stable for a season because it was held together by secrecy. Secrecy can hold a structure together for a long time, but secrets do not stay hidden indefinitely. Light eventually finds every crack in what was built to avoid it. And when light finds those cracks, what appeared solid does not weaken gradually. It collapses rapidly because the stability was never structural. It was only the absence for a time of exposure. As it is written in Galatians 6-7, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A person reaps what they sow, my child. That is not a metaphor. It is a description of a law as consistent and as impossible to negotiate with as anything that governs the physical world. They planted seeds of deception, of manipulation, of taking what was not theirs to take. And during the season when it looked like nothing was happening, those seeds were not lying dormant. They were growing, not into the harvest they intended. Into the harvest the planting actually produces, which is always proportional to what was planted, regardless of what the planter hoped the proportion would be. I want to tell you about an old story that illustrates this principle with more precision than I can offer in abstract description. A man built a structure specifically designed to destroy someone he envied. He invested time, resources, and considerable energy into its construction. And on the very day it was intended to be used against the one he envied, the structure turned, and he fell into what he had built himself. That was not a coincidence in the story, and it is not a coincidence in the principle. The story illustrates, as it is written in Psalm 7:15 and 16, whoever digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit they have made. The trouble they cause recoils on them. Their violence comes down on their own heads. My child, this is the principle that is active in what is happening to the people who took from you right now. I am not the one constructing their downfall. They constructed it themselves, with their own choices, over a long enough period of time that the structure they built has finally reached the moment when its instability becomes undeniable. You do not need to monitor their fall. You do not need to participate in it or even witness most of it directly. You need only to know that it is occurring, that it was set in motion by their own decisions, and that it cannot be undone by them now, because what is collapsing was never load-bearing in the way they believed it to be. My child, I want you to understand something further about the nature of what is collapsing for them right now. It is not happening all at once, in a single dramatic event that announces itself clearly to everyone watching. It is happening the way structural failure actually happens, in stages that look unrelated to each other, until enough of them have accumulated that the pattern becomes impossible to miss. A relationship that depended on the deception begins to fracture for reasons that look, from the outside, like ordinary relational friction. An advantage they gained through manipulation quietly stops producing the returns it used to produce, and they cannot identify why. A door that opened because of what they took from you begins, slowly, to close, and they tell themselves a story about market conditions or timing or bad luck, because the actual explanation is not available to them. You may never see an apology. You may never receive a confession or an acknowledgement of what was done. I want to release you from needing either of those things in order to know that the verdict has been rendered. You will see movement instead. You will witness changes that make sense only through the lens of something they cannot fully explain happening to the foundation they built. A position they assumed was secure suddenly is not. An alliance that seemed permanent begins to fracture without an obvious cause. Pay attention to the pattern rather than waiting for the confession, because the pattern is the confession. It is simply written in a language that does not require their cooperation to be read correctly. Type, "I did not curse them" in the comments. My child, I want to address something directly, because there is a difference I need you to understand clearly, and the difference matters for how you move forward from here. There is a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, and confusing the two will cost you something if you let it. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself. It releases you from the prison of carrying bitterness towards someone whose actions you cannot undo, and whose accountability is not yours to enforce. You can forgive completely. You can release every trace of the resentment that the betrayal planted in you. And forgiveness, fully extended, does not require you to reopen access to the person who hurt you. Reconciliation is a different thing entirely. It requires two people. It requires mutual acknowledgement of what happened. It requires genuine change, not performed change. Not change offered only because your circumstances have shifted and access to you has suddenly become valuable again. You can forgive someone fully and still decide with complete peace that the relationship served whatever purpose it served and does not need to be resurrected now that the season has changed. That is not hardness, my child. That is wisdom that was earned through what you survived. I want you to watch carefully for the people who reappear once your restoration becomes visible. Some of them will return because something in them has genuinely changed, and genuine change deserves to be received with grace. But not everyone who returns deserves access simply because they have returned. Discernment is the ability to tell the difference between someone who has actually changed and someone who has only adapted their strategy to account for your new position. Watch the timing of their return more closely than the words they use when they return. The people who disappeared when you were struggling and reappear only once you are visibly rising are telling you something important about their motive. whether they intend to or not. True relationships do not wait for your success before they show up. They show up in the struggle when there is nothing yet to gain from the showing up. You do not owe anyone an explanation for keeping certain doors closed. As it is written in Romans 12:19, do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. My child, you do not need to settle this account yourself. You were never meant to. Your responsibility was the staying faithful. Mine is the repayment, and I do not delegate that responsibility back to you, no matter how justified taking it back might feel in a given moment. My child, I also want to address a fear that I know has been present in you, even if you have not said it out loud to anyone. The fear that if you allow yourself to fully enjoy what is coming, you will somehow become vulnerable to losing it the same way you lost what was taken before. I want to speak directly into that fear, because it is reasonable given what you have survived, but it does not belong in the season you are entering. After someone has been burned, it is natural to become cautious around fire. But the goal was never to avoid fire for the rest of your life. The goal is to learn how to work with it without being consumed by it again. You do not need to live in permanent vigilance against the possibility of another betrayal in order to protect yourself from one. What you need is wisdom. And wisdom is different from fear in ways that matter enormously for how you live. Fear says trust no one. Wisdom says trust carefully, with eyes open. Fear says protect everything equally and let nothing close. Wisdom says protect what actually matters and release your grip on what does not. Fear operates from a posture of scarcity, certain that loss is always approaching and must be guarded against at every turn. Wisdom operates from a posture of sufficiency, confident that what I have prepared for you cannot be stolen by the same mechanism that stole from you before, because you are not the same person walking into this season that you were walking into the last one. The discernment you develop through the betrayal is not a wound. It is equipment. Carry it as equipment, not as a scar you keep reopening to make sure it still hurts. Type "the case is heaven's now" in the comments. Sow a seed for the one who is learning the difference between forgiveness and access, who is exercising discernment about who deserves to return, and who has released the responsibility of repayment into the only hands capable of carrying it correctly. Visit the link in the description below or scan the QR code on your screen. Sow it as a declaration that vengeance was never yours to carry, and the release of it is part of what restoration is producing in you, my child. I want to tell you what restoration actually looks like when it is real, because I do not want you confusing the genuine thing with the emotional excitement that sometimes accompanies hope without being connected to anything substantial. The first thing you will notice is increased clarity. Decisions that used to paralyze you with overthinking will begin to feel obvious. You will know what to say yes to and what to decline without the extended internal negotiation that exhausted you in the previous season. That clarity does not come from you trying harder to think clearly. It comes from alignment, the kind that settles in once a season of confusion has run its full course and given way to what comes after it. The second thing you will notice is unexpected favor. Doors will open that you did not know existed. Resources will become available that were not there in the previous month. People will reach out to you, not because you pursued them, but because something in your bearing has shifted in a way they can sense, even if they cannot name it. This is not luck, my child. It is the visible result of a spiritual repositioning that was happening the entire time you thought you were simply waiting. If you feel a quiet settling in your chest as you hear this, a recognition rather than an emotional surge, that is the Spirit confirming what I am telling you. The third sign of genuine restoration is a stabilizing of your internal state. You have been operating in something close to survival mode for long enough that you may have forgotten what it feels like to function from rest instead of from vigilance. Restoration brings a steadiness that does not depend on your external circumstances holding still. You will sleep differently. You will think with less static. You will feel lighter, not because every problem has resolved, but because the specific weight of carrying an injustice that had not yet been addressed has been lifted off your shoulders and placed where it always belonged, in my hands rather than yours. The fourth sign is that old patterns will begin to lose their grip without you having to fight them directly. You will notice, somewhere along the way, that you have stopped replaying the conversations from the season that hurt you. You will stop checking on what the people who wronged you are doing. You will lose interest in proving anything to anyone who doubted you. That is not denial of what happened. That is freedom. And freedom, when it is genuine, does not arrive loudly. It settles in quietly, and you often notice it has arrived only after it has already been present for a while. My child, there is a fifth sign of genuine restoration I want you to watch for, because it is the one most people overlook entirely. It is the return of capacity that you assumed had simply been lost for good. Creativity that felt blocked for years will begin to move again without you forcing it. Ideas will arrive without the strain that used to accompany every attempt to think beyond your immediate survival. Solutions to problems that had felt permanent will present themselves without the panic that used to accompany every attempt to solve them. I want you to understand why this happens, because it is not mystical. It is structural. When a person's internal system remains in a prolonged state of threat, it diverts resources away from everything that is not directly required for survival. Creativity is one of the first capacities to be deprioritized under that condition, because creativity requires a sense of safety that survival mode cannot provide. Vision requires mental space that constant vigilance does not leave available. Neither can flourish while you are bracing against the next blow. But as the restoration I am describing settles into your actual circumstances, your internal system recalibrates along with it. You move from surviving to building, and in that shift, capacities that seemed gone are revealed to have only been dormant, waiting for conditions safe enough to wake them. You may also notice a change in the scale of what you allow yourself to imagine for your future. For a long stretch of this season, your dreams may have shrunk to fit the size of your disappointment, because every time you allowed yourself to imagine something larger, circumstances arrived to crush the imagining. I want you to feel permission rising in you now to dream at the actual scale of what I am preparing, not the reduced scale that the previous season trained you to expect. That permission is not naive optimism. It is recalibration to the truth of what is actually coming. After a long season of recalibrating downward to survive what was actually happening type, I released the resentment in the comments. My child, I want to speak now about what restoration requires of you, because restoration is not only about receiving back what was taken, it is about being entrusted with more than what was originally lost, and more requires something different from you than what the previous season required. As it is written in Genesis 50, what they intended for harm, I intended for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph said that to the brothers who had betrayed him, after years of imprisonment, had been transformed into a position of authority that none of them could have predicted. My child, the principle in that story is still active. What was meant to harm you did not succeed in its intention. It became, in my hands, the preparation for something the harm itself could never have produced on its own. But preparation that becomes position carries responsibility with it. Talent can carry a person to a door that character alone is required to walk through. Opportunity can open access that integrity has to be the thing sustaining once the access has been granted. I have not rushed your restoration, even when the waiting felt unbearable to you, because shortcuts produce structures that cannot bear real weight, and what I am restoring you into requires a structure that can. My child, I also want to speak about the people who will be drawn toward you in this new season, because they will be different in character from the people who surrounded you in the previous one. These will be people who can see your value without needing to diminish it in order to feel comfortable next to it. They will celebrate what is opening for you without experiencing it as a threat to their own progress. They will invest in what you are building without requiring control over it as the price of their investment. This shift in the quality of the relationships available to you is part of the restoration itself, not a separate blessing layered on top of it. You are not being returned to your old networks with a few cosmetic improvements. You are being introduced to entirely new ones, calibrated to the maturity and the vision and the capacity that the previous season, difficult as it was, actually built in you. Do not exhaust yourself trying to preserve connections that no longer fit who you have become. Release them with whatever grace you can manage, and trust that the space their absence creates will be filled by what is actually aligned with where you are going rather than where you used to be. I want you to also receive something that may be difficult to hear at first, but that I believe in time will bring you a peace you have not yet experienced regarding what was done to you. You may find yourself somewhere further along in this season, feeling something close to gratitude toward the very people who betrayed you, not because what they did was acceptable. It was not, and I am not asking you to revise that judgment, but because what they did revealed something in you that may never have surfaced under easier circumstances, a strength you did not know you carried until it was tested. A resilience that only forms under exactly the kind of pressure you were under. A character that only becomes visible through the specific trial you walk through. They intended to diminish you. Instead, without meaning to, they participated in developing you. That does not mean you invite them back into proximity. It does not mean you minimize what they cost you. It means you recognize that even their worst intentions toward you could not, in the end, override what I was doing in you the entire time. What they meant for harm, I have been turning toward a different purpose since before they ever acted on their intention. Some of what is opening for you now will tempt you to move quickly, simply because the doors are finally opening after such a long season of them being closed. I want you to resist that particular temptation. Speed is not the same thing as progress. When you move from a place of fear that the opportunity will disappear if you do not seize it immediately, you make decisions shaped by scarcity rather than by alignment. When you move at the pace of peace instead, even when peace moves more slowly than urgency would prefer, you make decisions that build something durable instead of something merely fast. One produces chaos eventually, the other produces what lasts. Be careful. Also, about who you allow to advise you in this new season. Not everyone who offers counsel has access to your actual best interest. Some people counsel from the limitations of their own unhealed experience and project their fears onto the possibilities that are opening for you. Seek wisdom from those who have already walked through the kind of door that is now opening in front of you, not from those who remain where you used to be standing. My child, I also want to prepare you for something uncomfortable that tends to accompany visible restoration, because I would rather you know it is coming than be surprised by it when it arrives. Not everyone who watched you struggle will celebrate when they watch you rise. Some people found a strange comfort in your stagnation, because your difficulty made their own lack of progress feel less significant by comparison. Your rise disrupts that comparison, and people rarely respond well to having a comfortable comparison disrupted. They may disguise their discomfort as concern for you, suggesting caution where none is needed, or quietly questioning decisions they would not have questioned if the decisions belonged to someone else. They may frame their own unprocessed envy as wisdom, offering warnings that say more about their fear of being left behind than about any actual risk in your path. I do not want you to internalize their resistance as evidence that something is wrong with what is happening to you. Their resistance has nothing to do with the legitimacy of your restoration. It has everything to do with what your restoration reveals, often without you intending it to reveal anything, about choices they have made and have not yet been ready to examine. You are not responsible for managing their discomfort. You are responsible for continuing faithfully in what I am building, regardless of who finds that building difficult to watch. I also want to address the people who will reappear once your restoration becomes visible. Not to harm you again, but simply to observe where you have arrived. Sometimes the people from a previous chapter return not to apologize and not to extract anything further, but only to see with their own eyes what became of the person they once dismissed or underestimated. How you respond to their observation matters more than anything you might feel compelled to say to them. You do not need to reopen doors in order to prove that you have healed. Healing speaks through the boundaries you maintain just as clearly as it speaks through any forgiveness you have extended. You do not owe anyone a performance of your transformation. The transformation itself is sufficient testimony, and it does not require your narration to be understood by the people watching it. Type "I receive what is mine" in the comments. Sow a seed before the closing prayer for the one who is stepping into restoration and learning what it requires of them, who is choosing the pace of peace over the pace of fear, who is exercising the discernment that the previous season cost them so much to develop. Visit the link in the description below or scan the QR code on your screen. Sow it as a declaration that what is opening will be stewarded well, because the one stepping through the door has already been refined by what it took to arrive at it. My child, I want to also tell you what it will feel like. from the inside to know that something is genuinely part of this season of restoration rather than a distraction dressed up to look like one. Genuine alignment carries both excitement and peace at the same time, in the same moment, without one canceling out the other. Excitement without peace is usually a sign that ego has taken hold of something I did not actually author. Peace without any excitement at all is often a sign of settling for less than what I intended, accepting something safe because it requires nothing of your faith. But when you feel both together, the pull towards something and the steadiness that accompanies the pull, that combination is rare enough that you should pay close attention whenever it appears. Trust your internal compass more than you have allowed yourself to trust it in the past. It has been recalibrated through everything you walk through, and it is more accurate now than it has ever been. I also want you to know that your voice will begin to carry a different kind of weight in this season. Not because you will speak louder or more often, but because you will speak from a steadiness that people can sense, even when they cannot articulate what they are sensing. People may begin to ask you how you remained grounded through what you went through. You do not need to dramatize the story when that happens. Your presence will answer most of what they are actually asking better than a detailed account ever could. There is also something I want to release you from carrying any further. Some of the people who hurt you did not fully understand, in the moment of doing it, the actual weight of what they were doing to you. That does not excuse the harm. It does not reduce your right to have grieved it fully, but it can release you from carrying a particular kind of resentment, the kind that assumes deliberate cruelty where there may have only been carelessness or self-interest blind to its own cost. Resentment is heavy, my child, and you are moving too quickly now toward what I am preparing to be slowed by weight that no longer serves a purpose in your hands. My child, let me close with what I most need you to carry forward from this word. You were never a victim of random misfortune. What happened to you was a targeted attack, and I want you to release any shame you have carried about not seeing it coming, because the people who construct strategic harm are skilled, specifically at making it look like ordinary bad luck until long after the damage is done. But here is what your enemy did not account for. Targeting someone who is under my covering does not weaken that person. It activates a level of defense and recompense that exceeds anything human effort alone could produce. They picked the wrong one to take from, and they are learning that now, through consequences that trace back entirely to their own choices, in a way that requires nothing further from you except your continued faithfulness to the steadiness you have already demonstrated. You do not need to announce what is happening to them. You do not need to point it out to the people around you or position yourself as the one who was right all along. Quiet confidence carries more weight than any explanation you could offer, and the people who need to understand what occurred will understand it without requiring your narration. Some things are between you and me. Honor that sacred space rather than feeling pressure to make every part of this season legible to an audience that was never entitled to the full account in the first place. As it is written in Habakkuk 2-3, the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it lingers, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. The lingering is over, my child. The appointed time was never a fixed date counted out on a calendar known only to you. It was the moment when the case was fully built, when the pattern was fully established, when the preparation in you had reached the point where you could carry what is coming without the weight of it undoing you. That moment has arrived. What you have been waiting for is no longer in transit. It has arrived at the appointed time, exactly when the preparation in you was complete enough to receive it without being broken by its weight. Heavenly Father, we come before you now over the chosen one who has carried the weight of injustice with a faithfulness that has cost them more than the people who watched from the outside will ever understand, who stayed silent when exposure was available, who chose restraint when retaliation was justified, who trusted a process they could not see the workings of for longer than felt reasonable, and did not abandon the trust even when it was tested at its furthest edge. We receive now the truth that the silence was never absence, that the delay was due process, not neglect, that what was taken is being returned, and what was meant for harm is being transformed into the foundation of something that the harm itself could never have produced. We release the resentment that the betrayal planted, and we receive instead the discernment to recognize who deserves to return and who does not. We ask for the wisdom to move at the pace of peace as the doors begin to open, and the character to steward well everything that the waiting has prepared us to carry. In the name of the one who takes up every contention brought honestly before him and settles every account in his own time, in his own way, completely and without need of our assistance. Amen. My child, I want you to know that the prayer just prayed over you was received the instant it was spoken, not queued behind the prayers of others, not processed in the order it arrived. Received directly by the one who has been building the case on your behalf since the first moment the injustice occurred, who has documented every choice you made to remain faithful through circumstances that would have justified a very different response, and who is now releasing the verdict that the season of gathering was always working toward. Nothing about what is coming next depends on you forcing it forward. It depends only on you continuing to stand in the same faithfulness that built the case that is now closing in your favor. My child, if this word reached the place in you that has been waiting for the silence to finally make sense, send it to the one person you know who is still in the season of staying faithful while watching someone else benefit from what was taken from them. They need to know the silence is not absence. The case has been built, and what is coming for them is not revenge they have to orchestrate. It is restoration they only have to receive. Tell them the verdict is no longer pending. Tell them the door that felt permanently sealed for so long is already beginning to move on its hinges. Quietly, the way doors move when the one opening them has no need to announce the opening in advance. God bless you richly and completely, my beloved child, in every part of what is now coming.